What is the price of a perfect image? For one woman, it was nearly her soul. Tonight, we're not just talking about celebrity drama. We're delving into a story of unimaginable public humiliation and the most epic comeback you've ever heard. We take you to the blinding lights of the red carpet at the Celestial Ball, where a devoted wife was brutally cast aside by her husband for another woman in front of the world's media. They thought she was a nobody, a disposable accessory. They were wrong. They had no idea she was the hidden heir to a global empire, and her billionaire father was watching. Stay with me, because this isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a queen, forgotten by everyone, picked up a crown and set their world on fire. The air in the Bel Air mansion was always chilled to a precise 68 degrees, a temperature Julian Thorne had read was optimal for preserving both fine art and a youthful complexion. For his wife Elara, it felt like living in a beautiful silent mausoleum. Tonight the chill was sharper, a blade of anxiety against her skin. It was the night of the Celestial Ball, the apex of the Los Angeles social calendar, an event Julian had been obsessing over for months. For him, it wasn't a charity gala. It was a battlefield, a place to be seen, to be photographed, to be envied. And Elara, he had made it clear, was a key part of his uniform. "Is that what you're wearing?" Julian's voice, smooth and cold as river stones, cut through the cavernous silence of their walk-in closet. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on his own reflection as he adjusted a pair of diamond cufflinks. Elara looked down at her dress. It was a custom piece by a lesser-known but brilliant designer, a sheath of dove-grey silk that moved like liquid moonlight. It was elegant, understated, and deeply personal. It was her. "I thought it was classic," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Julian finally turned his gaze, sweeping over her with the dispassionate air of an appraiser finding a flaw in a gemstone. "Classic Elara, this isn't a luncheon at the Getty. This is the Celestial Ball. People are wearing couture that costs more than a house. You look forgettable." The word hung in the air, another small, sharp cut to add to 1,000 others. For 5 years, Elara had tried to be the perfect wife to the hedge fund prodigy, Julian Thorne. She had hosted his soulless dinner parties, smiled at his vapid business partners, and slowly, piece by piece, allowed him to sand down the vibrant, passionate artist she once was into something more muted, more controllable. She had mistaken his intensity for passion, his possessiveness for love. Now she knew better. She was an asset, and her value was depreciating. "There's a box on the bed," he said, turning back to the mirror. "From Valentino. Wear that. The color is louder. It will show up better in the photographs." She didn't argue. Arguing was pointless. It would only end with a cold, clipped lecture about the importance of the Thorne brand and her duty to uphold it. She walked back into the bedroom. On the vast, empty expanse of their king-sized bed sat a garish fire-engine red box. Inside was a dress of the same color, sequined and severe, with a neckline that plunged to her navel. It was a beautiful dress, but it wasn't for her. It was for a character she was being forced to play, Mrs. Julian Thorne. As she changed her fingers, brushed against a small silver locket she always wore hidden beneath her clothes. It was smooth and worn, her only link to a life before Julian, a life she never spoke of. A life of quiet wealth, but suffocating expectations of a different kind. She had run from that life, desperate to be loved for herself, not for her name. She had fallen for Julian precisely because he had no idea who she really was. He had pursued Elara, the struggling sculptor, not the woman who stood to inherit a dynasty. In her youthful naivety, she had thought that meant his love was pure. Now the irony was a bitter pill in her throat. He didn't love her for her name, but he didn't love her either. He loved the idea of a beautiful, unthreatening wife. Downstairs, the limousine was waiting. Julian inspected her one last time, a flicker of approval in his eyes, as he saw her in the red dress. Much better. Now remember Elara. Big smiles. Wave but don't look desperate. And let me do the talking with the press. We'll be at the Hendersons' table. Stick close to me. She nodded, the practiced, placid nod of a woman who had learned that her opinions were an inconvenience. As she slid into the cool leather of the car, she caught her reflection in the tinted window. A stranger looked back at her, a woman in a borrowed dress with haunted eyes on her way to a ball, where she knew with a bone-deep certainty she did not belong. The gilded cage was closing in, and the night was just beginning. The world outside the limousine was a chaotic symphony of light and sound. 1,000 camera flashes exploded like miniature supernovas, turning the twilight into a strobing artificial day. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a wave of noise pressing in from all sides. This was the gauntlet, the red carpet of the celestial ball. Julian was in his element. He stepped out of the car with the practiced ease of a movie star, his hand already raised in a casual wave. He turned his smile, perfectly calibrated for the cameras, and offered a hand to Elara. It was a gesture of possession, not affection. As she took it, his grip was firm, his fingers cold. Head up. Smile. Don't squint in the flashes. He murmured, his lips barely moving. Elara took a deep breath, pasting a fragile smile onto her face. The red dress felt like a costume, scratchy and foreign against her skin. The reporters shouted their names, their questions, a garbled mess of, "Who are you wearing?" And Julian a word about the market. Julian handled them with masterful ease, tossing out a soundbite here, a charming laugh there. Elara stood beside him, a silent, smiling accessory, just as she'd been coached. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, not seeing her, but assessing her. The dress, the jewels, the husband she was attached to. That was her sum total. They were halfway down the carpet when Julian suddenly stopped. His grip on her hand tightened for a second, then vanished. "Actually," he said, his voice loud enough for the nearest cluster of reporters from E! News and Variety to hear. He turned to Elara, but his eyes were cold, distant. "I think I'll take it from here." Elara's smile faltered. "Julian, what are you talking about?" He let out a short, dismissive laugh. "This is the big league, sweetheart. Let's be honest, you were never quite cut out for it." He took a deliberate step away from her, creating a physical chasm between them on the sea of red. Confusion morphed into a sickening dread in the pit of Elara's stomach. The camera flashes seemed to intensify the clicks, sounding like a swarm of angry insects. And then she saw her. Parting the crowd of photographers like a shark, slicing through water, was Sienna Vance. She was a rising actress with a reputation for being as ambitious as she was beautiful. And she was wearing a dress of the exact same, Valentino red, almost identical to Elara's, but hers was clearly the superior version, the haute couture original, while Elara's was the ready-to-wear imitation. The cut was more daring, the sequins shone brighter, the fit was more immaculate. Sienna glided to Julian's side, slipping her arm through his as if she belonged there. She shot Elara a look of pure venomous triumph. "Julian, darling." Sienna purred loud enough for every microphone to catch. "You didn't tell me you were bringing a fan." The reporters erupted. The focus of every camera, every lens, every eye swung from Julian and Sienna as a couple to Elara standing alone. The narrative clicked into place for them instantly, a salacious, irresistible story falling right into their laps. Tech mogul Julian Thorne dumps wife on red carpet for actress Sienna Vance. "Elara, who are you wearing?" One reporter shouted the question, now dripping with sarcasm. "Is your marriage over, Mrs. Thorne?" yelled another. Julian wrapped a protective arm around Sienna's waist, pulling her closer. He looked directly at Elara, his expression one of utter indifference, as if he were looking at a stranger who had stumbled into his photo op. "No comment on my private life," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "But as you can see, I'm here to support the future of cinema." He gestured to Sienna, who preened under the attention. The humiliation was a physical blow. Elara felt the air rush from her lungs. Her face burned, her hands grew clammy. She was frozen, a statue of shame in a sea of flashing lights. They had planned this. The matching dresses, the timing, the public stage. It was a meticulously orchestrated ambush designed for maximum impact, for maximum cruelty. Julian wasn't just leaving her. He was erasing her, publicly branding her as the dowdy, disposable first wife. She looked at him, searching for any flicker of the man she thought she had married. She found none. There was only a cold, calculating stranger who was discarding her like last season's fashion. He and Sienna turned their backs on her and began walking towards the entrance of the ballroom, a triumphant new power couple. The press-smelling blood swarmed around Elara. The flashes were blinding, the questions like daggers. She felt her knees weaken. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the plush red carpet beneath her feet. She was utterly, completely alone. A forgotten woman in a knockoff dress, left behind in the glare of the spotlight they had so viciously stolen from her. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Elara. She had to get out. Turning her back on the ravenous pack of reporters, she fled. She didn't head for the ballroom entrance, but veered off to the side towards a service corridor she spotted near the velvet ropes. Murmurs and a few stray camera flashes followed her, but the main swarm was still fixated on Julian and Sienna's grand entrance. She pushed through a heavy door and found herself in a stark, dimly lit hallway. The roar of the red carpet was instantly muffled, replaced by the low hum of industrial air conditioning. The glamour of the celestial ball was a world away. Here it smelled of disinfectant and catering. Leaning against the cool concrete wall, Elara finally let herself breathe. A dry, ragged sob escaped her lips, but no tears came. She was too numb, too hollowed out by the sheer, calculated cruelty of it all. It wasn't a breakup. It was an execution. Julian hadn't just ended their marriage. He had tried to end her, to annihilate her social standing and self-worth in one fell swoop. She slid down the wall, her ridiculous red dress bunching around her. What was she supposed to do? Now call a cab in a couture gown with no purse, since Julian's assistant always held everything. Go back to the silent, empty mansion that had never felt like a home. Every option felt like a different shade of defeat. She had run away from one gilded cage only to lock herself in another far more brutal one. Her father, with all his power and influence, had been overbearing and controlling, but he had never been cruel. He had wanted to protect her from a world he knew was filled with men like Julian Thorne. In her desperate bid for freedom and a normal life, she had proven him right. The thought was its own special kind of agony. "Mrs. Thorne." The voice was deep calm and utterly unexpected. Elara's head snapped up. Standing at the end of the corridor was a man in a simple, impeccably tailored black suit. He was tall with short-cropped grey hair and an air of quiet authority that was more intimidating than any overt display of power. He wasn't a guest or a staff member. He was something else, entirely. I think you have the wrong person," Elara stammered, her voice hoarse. "That's not my name anymore, it seems." The man walked closer, his steps silent on the concrete floor. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a flicker of something that looked like sympathy. "My name is Marcus," he said. "And I have been looking for you, Ilara." The sound of her given name spoken by this stranger was a shock. No one in Julian's world called her Ilara. It was always Mrs. Thorne or Julian's wife. "How do you know my name?" she asked, a sliver of fear cutting through her numbness. Marcus stopped a respectful distance from her. "Your father sent me. He asked me to keep an eye on you. From a distance." Ilara's heart stopped. Her father, Alistair Sterling, the reclusive titan of industry father she hadn't spoken to in over 6 years, the man whose world of private jets board meetings and global influence she had so emphatically rejected. My father. The words felt foreign on her tongue. He doesn't know anything about my life here." "Oh, I believe he knows everything, Ms. Sterling." Marcus corrected her gently, using her real surname, the name that carried the weight of a global empire. "He respected your wish for independence. He never interfered. But he has always had people nearby. For emergencies." Marcus's gaze flickered towards the door leading back to the red carpet. "And I believe tonight qualifies as an emergency." Ilara stared at him, her mind reeling. All these years she had thought she was completely on her own, forging her own path. But a safety net had been there all along, invisible and silent. The realization was both comforting and deeply unsettling. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out not a weapon, but a sleek, featureless satellite phone. "He wants to speak with you." He held it out to her. Ilara looked at the phone as if it were a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. Her hands trembled as she took it. It was cool and heavy, a solid, tangible link to a past she had tried to bury. She pressed the phone to her ear, her heart pounding, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She heard the faint hiss of a secure connection, and then a voice she hadn't heard in years, a voice that had once been the sole authority in her life. It was deeper, perhaps a little gravelly with age, but instantly overwhelmingly familiar. "Ilara," said the voice of Alistair Sterling, "it's time to come home." The voice on the other end of the line was like a key turning in a lock deep inside her. It unlocked a flood of memories of sitting on his knee in a cavernous library, smelling of old books and leather, of him teaching her how to read stock tickers before she could properly ride a bike, of the suffocating weight of his expectations. "Father," she whispered the word, feeling clumsy in her mouth. "I'm here, my girl." Alistair Sterling's voice was steady, a bedrock of certainty in her swirling chaos. "I saw what happened. The whole world did. Marcus is sending you a link. It's a live feed." Ilara's brow furrowed. A live feed of what? Of a lesson being taught. His voice held a note of cold fury that she remembered well, a quiet rage he reserved for betrayals and unacceptable failures. That young man, Julian Thorne, he made 2 critical errors tonight. The first was underestimating my daughter. The second was doing it so publicly that he left me no choice but to respond. As he spoke, a text alert chimed. It was Marcus sending a live stream from one of the major news outlets covering the gala. The video showed Julian and Sienna posing inside the ballroom, champagne glasses in hand, soaking in their moment. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Finance King Julian Thorne debuts new love." "Why did you leave Ilara?" her father asked, his voice softening. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question, one he had clearly pondered for 6 years. "I had to," she said, the words tumbling out. "You had my life planned out to the minute. The schools, the degree, the seat on the board, even the sons of your business partners you wanted me to meet. I didn't know who I was outside of being Alistair Sterling's daughter. I wanted to be, loved for just being me. I wanted to see if I could make it on my own. A heavy sigh echoed down the line. And did you make it on your own? I made art, she said defensively. I had a small studio. I was happy for a while. And then you met him, Alistair finished for her. A man who saw a beautiful, intelligent woman with no powerful family to protect her. A blank canvas he could paint his own ambitions onto. I had him vetted the week you started dating him, you know. I have a file on Julian Thorne thick enough to stop a bullet. His greed, his narcissism, his portfolio built on dangerously high risks. I wanted to warn you. But you had asked for space, and forcing my way back into your life would have only driven you further away. So I waited. It has been the hardest 6 years of my life. A lump formed in Ilara's throat. He hadn't been angry. He had been waiting. He told me he loved me. She said the words, tasting like ash. He loved the idea of you, Alistair corrected gently. But that's in the past. What matters is the next 10 minutes. That man and that woman staged a public spectacle to humiliate you. We are going to stage 1 to correct the record. I am tired of hiding my greatest asset, my true legacy, and that Ilara has always been you. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. Julian Thorne thinks his universe revolves around money and media attention, so we're going to use money and media attention to shrink his universe down to the size of a pinhead. Marcus is outside with a car. There's a change of clothes for you. My team has already been in touch with the event organizers. They are expecting you. Expecting me to do what go back in there. The thought was horrifying. You are going to walk back into that ballroom, and you are going to watch as the spotlight he so desperately craves becomes a white-hot incinerator. You are not the forgotten wife, Ilara. You are my daughter. You are a sterling. It's time everyone remembered what that means. His conviction was a steel rod pressed against her spine. The numbness began to recede, replaced by a slow-burning ember of anger. He was right. Julian hadn't just insulted her. He had insulted the legacy she had tried to escape the father, who had, in his own way, been protecting her all along. Okay, she said, her voice stronger now. What do I need to do? Just be yourself. Ilara. Alistair said, a hint of pride in his tone. The brilliant, strong woman I raised. Walk in there with your head held high. I'll take care of the rest. I'll see you on the screen. The line went dead. Ilara handed the phone back to Marcus. She looked down at the gaudy red dress, the uniform of her humiliation. It felt like a snake's skin she needed to shed. The car is this way, Ms. Sterling, Marcus said, his tone formal, but his eyes kind. We don't have much time. She followed him out into the cool night air, away from the noise and the glare. A sleek black Maybach was idling silently at the curb, its presence both discreet and commanding. The door opened, and as she slid inside, she left Ilara Thorne, the humiliated wife, behind on the pavement. When she re-emerged, she would be someone else entirely. She would be Ilara Sterling. The interior of the Maybach was less a car and more a private command center. A fresh bottle of water and a neatly folded garment bag lay on the seat. Marcus drove with silent, unnerving efficiency, circling the venue to a private high-security entrance reserved for heads of state and A-list celebrities seeking to avoid the main red carpet. Your father had this sent from his private collection, Marcus said, nodding to the garment bag. He thought it would be more appropriate. Inside the bag was a dress that was the polar opposite of the Valentino. It was a custom Schiaparelli gown, a masterpiece of midnight blue velvet, so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it. It wasn't loud or revealing. Its power was in its structure, strong architectural shoulders, a clean line that swept to the floor, and a single breathtaking piece of jewelry integrated into the neckline, a cascade of diamonds and sapphires from the sterling family vault, shaped like a constellation of stars. It was armor made of silk and starlight. As Ilara changed, she felt a profound transformation. The red dress had been a costume of submission. This gown was a declaration. It was the armor of her birthright. Along with the dress was a small velvet box containing a pair of sapphire earrings and a simple instruction card. Put your hair up. Let them see your face. With practiced hands, she swept her hair into an elegant, severe chignon at the nape of her neck. When she looked at her reflection in the car's vanity mirror, the face that stared back was different. The fear was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. The sterling jawline, her father's jawline, seemed more pronounced. Her eyes, which had been clouded with hurt, were now clear and focused the color of a stormy sea. Marcus handed her a small earpiece. Your father will be able to speak to you through this. His technical team is ready. She fitted the earpiece, the small device cool against her skin. I'm ready, she said. The car pulled up to the private entrance. 2 members of the gala's executive board were waiting, their faces a mixture of anxiety and awe. They had clearly received a call from someone they didn't dare disobey. Ms. Sterling, one of them said, bowing his head slightly. Welcome. We apologize for the disturbance earlier. Please allow us to escort you. They walked her through a private corridor, bypassing the clamor of the main lobby. As they neared the grand ballroom doors, Ilara could hear the drone of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft strains of a jazz quartet. It was the sound of a world that had discarded her only 30 minutes ago. Hold for a moment. Her father's voice crackled softly in her ear. Let them get comfortable in their little victory. Through the crack in the doors, she could see Julian and Sienna holding court at the center of the room. They were laughing, accepting congratulations from fawning socialites who were always eager to align with the newest power couple. Julian had his hand on the small of Sienna's back, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He had won. Okay, Ilara, Alistair's voice came again, low and steady. It's time. Remember who you are. Go. The 2 event organizers pulled the towering ballroom doors open, and Ilara walked in. A hush fell over the tables nearest the entrance. First a ripple of silence that spread through the vast room like a shock wave. Every head turned. Conversation died. The jazzed quartet faltered, the saxophone player letting out a confused squawk before falling silent. It wasn't just her entrance. She was flanked by Marcus and another man with the same quiet, dangerous air. They weren't bodyguards for a socialite. They were security for a titan. But it was Ilara who commanded the room. She moved with a grace and purpose that was utterly magnetic. Her head was high, her gaze sweeping across the room, missing nothing, acknowledging no one. The midnight blue gown didn't ask for attention, it commanded it. The sterling diamonds at her throat glittered with cold fire, catching the light from the chandeliers and throwing it back, magnified. She was no longer the sad grey wife. She was an apparition of power, a queen returning to her court. She saw Julian's face across the room. His smile froze, then melted away, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief. He stared at her as if he were seeing a ghost. Sienna's triumphant smirk curdled into a confused frown. Who was this woman? Where had she gotten that dress? Those jewels, Ilara ignored them. Her eyes scanned the room until she found an empty table at the edge of the dais, a table that had clearly been set at the last minute. With Marcus holding the chair for her, She sat down alone, in full view of everyone. She didn't look at her phone. She didn't fidget. She simply sat poised and serene and waited. The entire ballroom was now fixated on her, the air thick with unspoken questions. The gossip was instantaneous, a frantic whispering from table to table. Who was she? Why was she back? What in God's name was going on? Julian Thorne, for the first time in his life, had completely lost control of the narrative. The spotlight he had so carefully engineered was now trained with laser-like intensity on the woman he had tried to destroy, and she wasn't flinching. In her ear, her father's voice was a low, satisfied murmur. Excellent. Now for the main event. Just as the whispers in the ballroom reached a fever pitch, the lights dimmed. The soft jazz music cut out abruptly. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Guests looked around, confused, assuming a power failure. Then the massive screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying a placid loop of the charity's logo, flickered to life. They didn't show the logo. They showed a single, powerful face. He was an older man, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of decades of ruthless business decisions. He was seated in a leather chair in front of a fireplace, a portrait of quiet, unshakable authority. Though most of the younger social media stars and influencers in the room didn't recognize him, a cold dread began to dawn on the faces of the older, wealthier guests. The titans of finance, the CEOs, the old money families. They knew exactly who they were looking at. It was Alistair Sterling, the legendary reclusive billionaire. A man who hadn't made a public appearance in over a decade. A ghost from the highest echelons of global power, now broadcasting Lev into their party. Julian Thorne's face went white. The champagne glass in his hand trembled. He recognized that face from the cover of Fortune magazines from his college years. The man was a myth, a kingmaker. What was he doing? "Good evening." Alistair Sterling's voice boomed from the speakers, a voice accustomed to commanding boardrooms and parliaments. "I apologize for interrupting your evening. My name is Alistair Sterling, and I am the chairman and CEO of Sterling Industries." A wave of frantic murmuring swept the room. Phones were instantly out, people frantically Googling the name. Sienna Vance looked at Julian, her expression a mask of confusion. "Who is that?" she whispered. Julian couldn't answer. His throat was dry. For many years, Alistair continued his gaze piercing through the camera. "I have conducted my business and my life in private. I have always believed that results speak louder than announcements. Tonight, however, an announcement is required, a correction to the public record." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. His eyes seemed to scan the room until they landed on the camera feed, showing Elara seated alone at her table. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "My greatest achievement has not been building a global conglomerate. It has been raising my daughter, a daughter who, for her own noble reasons, chose to leave my world behind to find her own path to see if she could be valued for her character and talent alone without the weight of her family name." The cameras in the room, operated by the stunned press corps, all swiveled in unison, a herd of mechanical beasts turning their gaze upon Elara. Her face was calm, her expression regal. She met the stare of the world without blinking. "That experiment," Alistair said, his voice hardening, "has now come to its conclusion. My daughter has seen the world for what it is, and the world tonight will see her for who she is." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes finding the camera again. Julian felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This couldn't be happening. "Some of you in that room tonight may know her as Elara Thorne," Alistair declared, his voice ringing with authority. "That is a temporary name, a footnote in her story that officially ends this evening. To me and to the world from this moment forward, She is Elara Sterling, my daughter, my only child. He let that sink in. The sound in the ballroom was one of 1,000 minds simultaneously exploding. Elara Julian Thorne's meek, discarded wife was the sole heir to the Sterling Empire. An empire 10 times, 100 times larger and more powerful than Julian's piddling hedge fund. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. But Alistair wasn't finished. Effective immediately, I am stepping back from my role as CEO of Sterling Industries. The board has just concluded an emergency session and has unanimously approved my successor. The new CEO and chairwoman of the entire Sterling global portfolio is my daughter Elara Sterling. If the first announcement was a shockwave, this was a nuclear detonation. Champagne glasses dropped, jaws hung agape. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic clicking of cameras. Across the room, Julian Thorne looked like he had been turned to stone. His face was a ghastly shade of pale, his eyes wide with horror and dawning comprehension. He had just publicly, brutally humiliated the new CEO of one of the most powerful corporations on the planet. He hadn't just divorced a wife, he had declared war on an empire. Sienna Vance slowly backed away from him, her own face a canvas of disbelief and terror. She had hitched her wagon to a shooting star, only to discover it was a meteor plummeting back to Earth. Alistair Sterling's face on the screen softened as he looked at his daughter one last time. "Welcome home, Elara. Make me proud." The screens went black. The lights in the ballroom came back up, blindingly bright. For a moment, there was a stunned, breathless silence. Then the entire room erupted into chaos. The reporters, no longer caring about Julian or Sienna, stampeded towards Elara's table, tripping over each other, shouting her new name. Ms. Sterling, Ms. Sterling, a comment. "When did this happen? What will be your first act as CEO?" The spotlight had shifted. It was now hers, brighter and more absolute than Julian could have ever dreamed. He was left in the shadows, a forgotten man in the blinding glare of his own colossal, world-shattering mistake. The black screens were like two dead eyes staring out at the stunned ballroom. The silence that followed was not empty. It was dense and heavy, filled with the weight of 1,000 shattered preconceptions. For a full 10 seconds, the only sounds were the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the chandeliers and the frantic, silent work of 100 different minds trying to reboot their understanding of the world. In this room where status was currency and perception was reality, the market had just undergone a history-making crash, and a new unknown power had cornered it all. Elara sat perfectly still at her table, the epicenter of this deafening silence. The adrenaline from her father's gambit coursed through her, a strange electric hum beneath her skin. It was a terrifying, exhilarating sensation, like standing on a cliff's edge and realizing you could fly. She could feel every eye in the room on her, not as a woman, but as a phenomenon. They weren't just looking. They were reassessing, recalculating. She saw the vulture-like glint in the eyes of the reporters, the dawning horror on the faces of Julian's allies, and the naked frantic opportunism blooming on the faces of those who realized they had a chance to get in on the ground floor of a new dynasty. This, she thought with a chilling clarity, was the world her father had tried to shield her from, and the world he had just handed to her. A world of predators and prey where power was the only language truly spoken. And tonight, she had been taught to speak it fluently. The spell broke. A single champagne flute dropped from a nerveless hand, shattered on the polished floor, the sound like a gunshot. It was the starting pistol for the chaos. The press, a single ravenous organism, surged forward. But before they could take more than a few steps, Marcus and his associate were on their feet. They didn't draw weapons or raise their voices. They simply created a perimeter of absolute professionalism, their calm a more effective deterrent than any threat. Elara rose from her chair, her movements fluid and deliberate. The midnight blue Schiaparelli gown settled around her, a column of dark power. She took a breath, not of nervousness, but of finality. She felt the last vestiges of Elara Thorne, the timid, accommodating wife, burn away like morning mist, leaving behind the cool, solid core of Elara Sterling. She wasn't here to escape. She was here to collect a debt. Ignoring the cacophony of the press, she turned her gaze across the room. Her target was motionless, a man trapped in the amber of his own cataclysmic failure. Julian. She began to walk. The journey across that ballroom was the longest walk of her life. The crowd, a mix of LA's most powerful and most famous, parted for her, as if she were a visiting monarch. No one dared to get in her way. She could hear the frantic whispers trailing in her wake, the rustle of silk, and the sharp intakes of breath. She passed the table of the Hendersons, the billionaire real estate magnates, whose party she'd been so nervous about attending last year. Mrs. Henderson, who had once looked straight through her, now stared with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. Elara met her gaze for a split second, offering nothing, and watched the woman flinch and look away. Her path took her past men who had condescendingly called her honey at Julian's dinner parties, and women who had whispered about her simple clothes behind her back. Their faces were now masks of horrified respect. This was power, not the flashy, desperate power Julian chased, which was loud and needed constant validation. This was the quiet, foundational power that reshaped rooms simply by entering them. Finally, she stood before him. Julian looked like a man who had witnessed an act of impossible, terrifying magic. His face was slick with a sheen of cold sweat, his impeccably tailored tuxedo suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting. The smug confidence had been flayed from him, leaving only the raw, twitching nerves of a narcissist who had just been confronted with his own cosmic insignificance. Elara. He began, his voice a ragged whisper. He took a half-step forward, his hand starting to reach for her, a pathetic, instinctual gesture of possession that died in the air. Elara, what is this? Some kind of joke? A stunt? Elara looked at the man she had once loved, the man she had shared a bed with and a life with, and felt a profound and final disconnect. He was a stranger, a miscalculation she had spent 5 years of her life living inside. A stunt, she repeated, her voice perfectly level, yet carrying an arctic chill that made him recoil. You think my family, my life, is a stunt? No, Julian. Tonight's performance was all yours, a meticulously planned public spectacle. I simply arranged for a better closing act. Listen, we can fix this, he pleaded, his eyes darting around frantically, seeing the sharks circling, smelling his blood in the water. Whatever this is, whatever game your father is playing, we can talk it through. We're a team, you and I. We're the Thorns. A faint, mirthless smile touched her lips. There is no we, Julian. There is no Thorn. That was the brand you were building, wasn't it? And I was to be your silent, decorative partner. The pretty, unassuming wife with no background to speak of, who would never overshadow you. What a catastrophic misjudgment. She leaned in her voice, dropping so only he could hear the surgical precision of her words. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a possession. You tried to diminish me, to make me smaller so you could feel bigger. You criticized my art. You isolated me from my friends. You dressed me up like a doll for your business meetings. You thought my gentleness was weakness, my kindness was naivety. You saw a canvas, and instead of admiring the art, you tried to paint it over with your own cheap, garish colours. That's not true, he hissed, but there was no conviction in it. He knew it was true. Every word was a nail in his coffin. It's the truest thing you've heard all night, she countered, her voice unwavering. And now for another truth. From this moment on, you are nothing to me. Less than a stranger. You are a bad investment that has been written off. A liability that is being liquidated. As if on cue, a calm, grey-haired man in a Savile Row suit stepped out from behind Marcus. He held a slim, elegant leather portfolio. He was Mr. Davies, the lead counsel for Sterling Industries' private family office, a man whose polite inquiries had made entire governments tremble. Mr. Thorne. Davies said, his voice as crisp and dry as old parchment. A moment of your time. He opened the portfolio and handed Julian a sheaf of papers. These are the divorce papers filed an hour ago in the state of Delaware, citing irreconcilable differences. All proceedings will be handled there under corporate privacy statutes. You will find the terms non-negotiable. Julian stared at the documents, his hands trembling too violently to read them. Our assets. The house. The accounts. Ah, yes, the assets, Davies continued smoothly. We have also filed a temporary restraining order and an emergency injunction against all assets, personal and corporate, held by yourself and Thorne Capital. It seems a preliminary review suggests a number of irregularities. Specifically, potential commingling of funds related to an initial seed investment made in your fund 6 years ago. An investment that, it turns out, was made by a blind trust managed by the Sterling family office as a wedding gift of sorts. A gift whose terms you have now violently breached. The blood drained completely from Julian's face. He looked like a man who had just been told the ground beneath his feet was no longer solid. His entire career, the foundation of his wealth, was built on her family's money, and he had never even known it. He was a creature of their creation, and he had just spat in the eye of his creator. Furthermore, Mr. Davies added, as a final twist of the knife, a full, independent and rather aggressive forensic audit will commence at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. I'm told the SEC has a particular interest in hedge funds that show unusual trading patterns just before major corporate succession announcements. It is, I believe, a rather active line of inquiry for them. I would advise you to find legal counsel. Very, very good legal counsel. Julian finally crumbled. The carefully constructed facade of the Wall Street Titan shattered, revealing the terrified, insecure man beneath. He looked at Elara, his eyes wide with a primal terror. He had been so proud of his kingdom, and in the space of 10 minutes she had shown him that it was nothing but a sandbox she had allowed him to play in. Satisfied, Elara gave a small nod to Mr. Davies. The reckoning was complete. She turned away from the wreckage of her husband, leaving him to the silence and the predatory stares of his former peers. Her path to the exit was clear, but one final obstacle stood in her way. Near the grand doors, Sienna Vance materialized her face, a desperate painting of feigned sympathy. She had shed her earlier triumphant smirk and was now wearing a mask of doe-eyed concern. Elara, she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. I am so sorry. I had no idea. Julian is a monster. He manipulated me. He lied to me. Elara stopped and looked at the actress. She saw the frantic calculations in Sienna's eyes, the desperate attempt to switch allegiances to salvage her career, to avoid being collateral damage in the war she had so eagerly helped start. Miss Vance, Elara said, her voice calm and clear, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Please don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else. You are not a victim. You were an accomplice. Sienna paled. No, I swear. Let me give you some professional advice. Elara continued, cutting her off. You are an actress, and you were auditioning for a role tonight, the powerful man's partner. It's a role you played with enthusiasm. Unfortunately for you, the production has been cancelled due to a catastrophic failure on the part of the male lead. I'd suggest you call your agent. Perhaps there's a role for you in a low-budget horror film. You have a genuine talent for looking terrified. The small crowd around them gasped, then tried to stifle their laughter. Sienna Vance stood utterly humiliated, exposed as the transactional shallow climber she was. Elara didn't give her a second glance. She walked through the grand doors, Marcus holding them open for her, and stepped out into the blessedly cool night air. The cacophony of the gala faded behind her, a distant, irrelevant noise. The Maybach was waiting at the curb, a silent black promise of a new life. As she slid into the plush leather interior, a secure phone on the seat buzzed. It was her father. She answered. I'm out. I saw Alistair Sterling's voice was filled with a deep, rumbling pride. You handled that with the grace of a queen and the ruthlessness of a Sterling. How do you feel? Elara looked out the window as the car pulled away, the grand venue shrinking in the distance. How did she feel? It wasn't triumph. It wasn't happiness. It was a profound, quiet sense of alignment, as if a piece of her soul that had been dislocated for years had just snapped back into place. I feel clear, she said finally. For the first time in a long time, I feel clear. Good, he said. Marcus will take you to the penthouse. It's been yours all along. We have much to discuss tomorrow, Madam CEO. She smiled a real smile this time. I look forward to it, Mr. Chairman. She ended the call and looked at her own hands in the dim light of the car. They were sculptor's hands, accustomed to shaping clay and stone. Now they were expected to shape a global empire. Perhaps it wasn't so different. Both required vision, patience, and the strength to chip away everything that wasn't essential to reveal the form that lay hidden within. The car ascended the winding roads into the hills, leaving the sprawling lights of the city below. They weren't heading back to the cold Bel Air mansion. They were heading higher, to the Sterling Grandview penthouse, a place she hadn't seen since she was a girl. A place with panoramic windows that looked down on the entire city. A new home, a new throne. From up there, the glittering world that had tried to break her would look very, very small. And so Elara Sterling walked away, not just from a cheating husband, but from a life that was never truly hers. This wasn't just a story about revenge, it was a story about reclamation. It's about reclaiming your name, your power, and your worth when the world tries to tell you that you have none. Julian and Sienna wanted to make her invisible, but they ended up giving her the biggest spotlight on earth. It's a powerful reminder that true value isn't in who you're standing next to on a red carpet, but in the strength you find within yourself when you're left standing alone. What did you think of Julian's epic downfall? Was it karma, or was it a masterfully played game of chess? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think Elara's first move as CEO should be? If you love stories of justice, epic comebacks, and watching bullies get exactly what they deserve, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a dose of empowerment, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the stories we have coming up next. Thank you for listening.